At one point, I kind of had this reputation, the person who could get to anyone, who spent 2 hours with Nelson Mandela, arriving alone in wild and crazy places at the worst possible moment.
We're joined by Vivian Walt, Paris correspondent for Time magazine.
This is Vivian Walt, and with the support of the Pulitzer, war is just hideous and ghastly. For a lot of journalists, winds up being among the most satisfying work you can do. You're seeing people at the most extreme moments. It's live history, and you have a front row seat to it. I get off the plane and I just hear the sound all over the airport of these metal shutters coming down, and everything is...
It is such a pleasure to welcome Vivian Walt, award-winning foreign correspondent based in France. She has written for Time magazine for over 20 years, as well as Fortune magazine, and her work has been published in the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, National Geographic, Business Week, and others. She has been a guest on NPR, CNN, WGBH, The World, and on France 24. She has reported from over 30 countries, and her most extensive recent work has been the Ukraine war, Russian sanctions, and the rise of right-wing populism in Europe. She has twice narrowly missed rocket attacks on her hotel in Baghdad and a bullet through her car window in Fallujah. Viv was raised in Cape Town, immigrated to New York, and now lives in Paris with her husband and son. You're usually the one asking the questions. So today, for me, asking you, it feels so special because I know that you're so accomplished over your career as a journalist. So when did you know that, did you go to university for journalism? And when did you know that that was the path you wanted to take?
I think I knew really young. Actually, there were two possible professions that I was kind of juggling. I wanted to be a journalist, I thought. Or I wanted to be an architect. Two completely, utterly different things. And at the time, you really needed good math scores to get into architecture school. You don't anymore, of course. But I didn't have those. I had like a few other skills, but math was not my strong point. So, and I also, I think, was much more geared towards journalism. And I think that was partly in my mind. I didn't really think of it at the age of 16, but it did somewhat mesh with my kind of restlessness and wanderlust. The thing about journalism is it's just never the same day by day. And it's also somewhat infinite because the world keeps turning. So you can, week by week, decide like where you want to go, who you want to meet, what you want to do. And that was very appealing to me.
So was there any particular person who inspired you to travel or ignite that wanderlust?
You know, we didn't really travel much as kids. I guess it was before the kind of huge travel era, maybe. Also, you know, we were raised at the bottom of Africa. So in some ways, the travel lust was a kind of reaction to the childhood I'd had. I felt very, very far away. I felt like real life was happening on the other side of the world. Of course, it wasn't quite like that. Real life was happening outside our door, but it felt very much like, especially as a kid, the whole youth culture, rock and roll, you know, everything was going on. We were very far away. So there was certainly like a strong desire to get out and travel. I did have a little bit of money that I got from my grandmother, and I used that to take a trip to Europe when I was 19, I think. It was the first time I had been out of Africa. And I can't say that I loved Europe. Everything I felt at the age of 19, I think I still feel. about Europe. There were wonderful things about it. There were things I really didn't particularly like at all. But it certainly gave me a taste of just wanting to kind of hit the road, I guess. And I traveled mostly alone, which was somewhat unusual for a 19-year-old girl. But I felt like it was the best way to travel. And every now and again I think about that because I sort of feel like journalism is a bit like that. You're often flying to places that you've never been to before alone and arriving alone and checking into a hotel alone and getting out on the streets alone and going to meet somebody you've never met before alone. And there's something very exciting about that. And I've never lost the taste for that. It feels more alive than, traveling with somebody or the family.
Yes, I've had that same experience. I remember getting off an airplane once in Brazil, and my colleagues had told me they would have a car ready, they would be at the airport, and I'm expecting someone to meet me, and there's no car, there's nothing, and I thought to myself, I have to navigate this, and I have to figure out how to get to the office and to work and to the hotel. And so I thought, I can do this. I can just walk out of this airport and take this. And I remember this, it was scary, but yet it was exhilarating to know I can do this. And then I actually rented a car, and they were so surprised that I could drive a stick shift because they weren't used to a single American woman just flying in and getting, and even my colleagues were like, you drove, you went and got it. And so it's like, yes, of course, I'm going to figure out how to get to work. So I do remember that feeling, and it empowers you.
It is,
to-
exactly.
yes, it
That's
does.
a very
Every-
good word for it. It's
Mhm.
empowering.
It is.
And I think especially as a woman, so I have dropped into, some pretty wild and crazy countries alone. And generally speaking, you're arriving there at wild and crazy times. So there are, really moments in which, and journalists always talk about this, you're always rushing in when everybody else is rushing out. And so all of us have this experience of like driving down the freeway into the eye of a storm when like there's a giant backup of cars going in the opposite direction. And whether that's literal, which often is literal, or metaphorical, that's often the experience.
How did you end up in Paris?
Well, I guess I have to say that I am not a big Paris lover. I mean, I've come to love it because it's my home and I have very good friends here and I've raised my child here. And the French government was kind enough to make us citizens last year. So in many ways, I have come to really appreciate Europe and Paris. But I was never crazy about Paris in the way that so many Americans are. I wasn't raised in America with a romance about Paris. To me, it was just another big European city with bad weather. Which it is.
Yes, which it is, like today.
But we were, I went to New York. I finally met my husband, married him. We were both journalists. We both had this idea that we wanted to go abroad. We didn't really know where. But both of us, in a very concentrated period of, say, a year, were offered several jobs. And we turned them down one by one. I could have gone to Hong Kong, turned that down. Could have gone to Washington, turned that down. He was offered something in Malaysia, turned that down. We started getting a reputation for being these pain in the neck, journalists who wouldn't just take an assignment. So we made a pact with each other that the very next offer that came along, to hell with it, we're taking it. The next offer was Paris. So it was like, okay, fine, yes.
Did you get the offer to go together and work for the same
Well,
company?
no, he
Okay.
got the offer, but then I quickly
Okay.
kind of made a deal. So off we went. We went so tentatively and so temporarily that we actually like left a car in the US. We left most of our possessions in the US. We subletted our apartment and we just kind of got on a plane. It's like we'll be back in 6 months. What happened very soon after we got here was 9/11. And that dramatically changed my career and his.
Yes.
Um,
And
so,
your previous home in New York, right? Was that where you were before you left?
well, actually, we had a very short interim working out of LA.
Okay.
So that's where we were. We
Okay.
left our car in a garage in LA. It's like after about a year, it's like maybe we should go back and sell the car
Yeah.
at least.
Someday I
Don't know if it even moves yet, but
Yeah. Someday I have to tell you the story about how my husband left a car also in Southern California, but he left it for 20 years. And I didn't know about it until on our insurance one day. I said, "Why do we have a 1974 VW Bug on our insurance?" And he goes, "Oh, I have a car in California." I thought, "You've been paying for this for 20 years?" We drove to California and got it. So,
well,
yes.
we did what every idiot does that moves countries. We like actually rented a storage
Unit?
room
Mhm.
and in California, shoved a ton of stuff in there, forgot about it for 20 years. And after 20 years, we like open it, like, what is this stuff? You couldn't even get rid of it. It was just junk
Yeah.
for which we'd paid thousands and
Yes.
thousands of
My
dollars.
husband had a storage unit as well.
Tip number one, if you're not moving something, get rid of it.
Yeah. We actually drove with a trailer to pick up the junk. Oh my goodness. That is I love that. I love that you have that story. Yeah.
But anyway, so we took
Uh-huh.
Paris. 9/11 happened. In fact, curiously enough, the day that 9/11 happened, I was at my desk in Paris writing a story about Afghan refugees in Paris. Very relevant to 9/11. And within minutes, our lives really changed as journalists. So I was on a plane very quickly to Pakistan, southern Pakistan, a city called Quetta, right on the Afghan border. My husband went north. He flew to Tajikistan. It took months, but we finally met up in Kabul. And we had this kind of very intense and very strange experience of there was no, this was before cell phones. So we had satellite phones, but that was about it. You had satellite phones. A satellite was on like the balcony of your hotel room. And sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't work. So there was no way to contact each other. What we would do was leave each other's messages with each other's editors. I'd call his editor, tell him I'm fine. He would call my editor, tell her I'm fine. And this went on really for months. We were in the middle of a very hot war. Yeah. And eventually we made it, both of us, him through the north, me through the south, and we made it to Kabul. So, there kicked in all my kind of arriving alone in wild and crazy places at the worst possible moments. And I got to say, the war is just hideous and ghastly, and I've covered a number of them. It nonetheless, for a lot of journalists, winds up being among the most satisfying work you can do. You're seeing people at the most extreme moments. It's, live history, and you have a front row seat to it. It was even more so here because it was American history. So for me, I was an immigrant to America and I loved America. I was very, very proud to be a new American. And I was seeing really like grand American history in a very kind of up close way. So that, and then immediately after that, we wound up, both of us, in Baghdad. Me several months before my husband, but we both ended up covering the Iraq War for quite a while, for the first phase of it, the fall of the Saddam Hussein regime, the invasion of the U.S. military, and the whole transformation of the country. And that was sort of an extraordinary experience, too. I finally left because it really just became very dangerous, and particularly for me. I had written a couple of stories in Time magazine, which really pissed off the religious, sheikhs.
Oh.
And I had been warned that I was basically a target. And eventually I had to get out. I had one or two very scary experiences of being tailed around by men with guns, and I didn't want any more of that. So that, and then very soon after that, we had a baby. So I can't say that necessarily changed. Everybody said, "Oh, you're going to be a mom, you won't travel again." And really, that wasn't the experience at all. What did happen is that I could no longer travel with my husband. We couldn't be in Baghdad for months on end. But my child was raised from, zero to be very accustomed to one of us being away for a couple of weeks. So, Papa would be gone for a couple of weeks and he'd come back, then I'd be gone. It was a little crazy sometimes. There were times when we literally were at the airport and had to wait for him to land before I could leave. And that happened a few times.
Yes, just passing baby.
Exactly.
Yes. Well, I am very familiar with that, but not in the same fashion. But my husband is the same way. He'll be gone for 2 weeks. And then he gets home and we trade, and then he does the school runs, the pickups, the groceries, the everything, so that I can go for work. And this morning he sent me a note saying that he had to leave a day early. And so, the first thing was like, who's going to take our son to school? And do I need to send a car to pick up? And, what's the accommodations? Because I will not be back for a few days. So
absolutely.
Called our oldest daughter, called some friends, and, made arrangements. But our son has been raised in a similar fashion as well. And I love that because I think it's more of a true partnership when you both have your own lives. And
exactly.
Yes.
I mean, we didn't really we didn't set it up with that intention. But I was always quite clear that, happy parents means happy child. And, mom at home was never going to be my role. So I didn't see why I would want to begin that.
Yes.
It just simply was never going to be me. And that's, somehow he's survived.
Yeah.
Fine.
Does your son know what he's going to university for?
Yes, actually. And he decided very early on it was not going to be journalism.
Okay. I was wondering if he was going to be going
very
down the
early
same
on.
path.
We said, "What do you think? You want to be a journalist?" No way. So
did he say it's too much work?
He's like, "What does Mama do all day? She just goes like this, sits on the computer, tap 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 tap," and it's like, so he is crazy about furniture design, and he, as to our great surprise, wound up in art school in New York.
That's amazing.
So that's his passion. It's been actually design, building, creating, has been his passion since he was 10, probably. He built his first electric scooter when he was 11. He has built all the closets in our house. He's built all the lamps in our house, our coffee tables. He's just, that's what he wants to do. He turned his bedroom into a workshop and moved into my office. So, so he was always going to be in that
and
direction.
design. That's
Yeah.
so interesting. My son also loves to build, and he goes to a high school that is a project-based
Oh, how
high school for
wonderful.
engineering and architecture and design.
I
And
don't think that exists in this
he
country,
I
but
know, it's so interesting. We did not know about that kind of a high school, but my son has a lot of learning differences, dyslexia, dysgraphia, dyscalculia. And we were very, he went to a specialized school when he was younger because he really needed a lot of help and intervention. And we were very concerned about high school because, he needed a lot of support and, he learned differently and he was very hands-on. He was always building with Legos and making things and cardboard and art, building things and drawing. Everywhere we went in the world, he would take his little notepad, would
amazing.
sit and draw. And I have the best pictures when he was little. He would have his little notepad and drawing. So we found out about this high school that was project-based where they build things and they make projects and they study the world and they try to solve global problems. And the first time we went to do the little overview of the school, he said, "Mom, these are my people. They get it."
Oh, that
They
is so
So,
great.
yes, so he's been there 2 years, and we are just so thrilled that he found
He's
this
16?
He's 16
That is
16,
amazing.
about to be 17, and, he will probably go to design school as well, so we've been looking at
Well,
universities for, project-based and,
well, I
engineering
can tell
design.
you all about that because my son applied to all of them.
Really?
Yeah.
Yes.
Um,
So
so,
But he also wanted a workshop. He told us that he just needed his own workshop. He's like, "You have an office, dad has the whole 3-car garage. I need my own space." So he actually has the 4th floor room of our house, the loft, and he turned it into his. And it is just a disaster of making things.
that is
And
fabulous.
so
Well, that's exactly our place. I
Mhm.
mean, we have 3 bedrooms, one of which is basically a workshop.
Uh-huh.
And he has a tiny little bedroom now,
Aw,
so that we've
yes.
created, he doesn't care. It's just like
Yeah.
the workshop is
Yeah.
really his life. So,
Aw. Well, that's so exciting. I love it when your children find their passion and when you see that and doing
exactly.
something exciting.
Exactly.
So are you still writing for I read you've written for Time for more than 20 years and
Indeed.
Fortune.
Yeah.
Are you still writing
Yeah.
for
It's a very shrunken magazine in a shrunken market. But I've just closed another piece for them. And I tend to write I've done a lot of different things for them, of course, including traveling all over the world. These days, I tend to focus on France for
Okay.
them. I've done a couple of big cover stories on Macron since he's been elected president of France, and several other kinds of covers. I've interviewed a lot of famous people for them. And in fact, at one point, I kind of had this reputation within Time of being the person who could get to anyone, which is not quite
Yes.
true, but I was happy to have that reputation. And of course,
I read that you interviewed Nelson Mandela.
I did interview Nelson Mandela after he came out of jail twice, I believe.
Really?
One was a crazy experience, and I was kind of young, but I was South African.
Mhm.
And so the story wound up bang on the door, on my doorstep.
Mhm.
And I was in Johannesburg. I had already moved to New York, but they sent me back to Johannesburg. And I was staying in Johannesburg, and Mandela came out of jail. And he was going to travel to Cape Town to begin negotiating the end of apartheid with the white government. I'm not sure even if people would remember this history. It seems so long ago now. But he was, without doubt, the most famous person on the planet. I was finishing a story late at night, and then I had to get to Cape Town for because the talks were beginning, and I ran for the airport and got on the midnight flight from Johannesburg to Cape Town. It's a 2-hour flight. And I got on the plane. The plane was completely empty except for Nelson Mandela
My goodness.
and his 3 bodyguards. I happened to know the bodyguards. I said to the guy, one of them, I said, would you mind swapping seats with me? I was like, looked at me a little askance. It's like, are you going to poison like the future president of the country? But anyway, did swap seats. And there I was, like, able to spend 2 hours with Nelson Mandela.
Oh my gosh, that's
Got
incredible.
off the plane, and the whole airport was filled with TV cameras from all over the world. And I walked off the plane with Nelson Mandela, and everyone was like,
Yeah.
how did you pull that one off? It's like, I have no idea. It's like,
That's were those magical moments where you know that you were just.
it wasn't that great an interview,
Yes,
to be
oh,
honest.
really?
It was never a particularly great interview. That was the kind of, tragedy about Nelson Mandela. And my parents were very, very strong supporters of Nelson Mandela. It was one reason they never wanted to leave the country. And when he finally came out of jail and he started making all these speeches, and turned out he was kind of a boring
Really?
speaker. And it's like my mother, kind of like, who had this, very sharp wit, said, the white people always thought that, like, he would come out and kill them, but actually he's going to, like, kill them with boredom. And it's like,
Oh.
but anyway, God bless him. Thank heavens for leaders like that.
Yeah. Who has been the most entertaining person that you have interviewed or that you enjoyed interviewing?
There's so many crazy experiences I've had just not that long ago. I was trying to interview Elon Musk for a story that I was going to do. It was sort of a fun story. It was about the Tesla factory he was building in Germany, which I finally got into, actually. But anyway, it was still under construction, and the environmentalists were going nuts in Germany because he was disturbing all the wildlife and kind of, digging up ground where there were kind of, endangered species of lizards. And so I kept emailing his people saying, I want to talk to Elon about the wildlife problem. Never thinking he'd ever respond, because he really doesn't give any interviews. But anyway, I'm in bed one night, 4/5 asleep. It's midnight on a Sunday night. My cell phone rings next to me. I pick it up. It's like, hi, Vivian. It's Elon. I hear you're trying to reach me. I'm like, oh, holy cow. I have to, like, spring out of bed, try to find like a recorder, open my computer.
Pretend to be awake.
It's like, turn on a light, sit down at a desk. It's just like completely crazy. And he, in his, somewhat crazy ways, like, wandering around his garden, he's got his baby in his arms, dogs barking, and he's like, he seems to have all the time in the world to speak. It was a Sunday afternoon for him. But I've had a lot of weird experiences like that. He was somewhat entertaining. Another experience I had was when I was based in Baghdad covering the war. Once again, we had no phones. We only had satellite phones and generators for electricity, and the whole thing was kind of like very pieced together in the middle of a war zone. I get a call one day, and this woman says, are you Vivian? Yes. I'm so-and-so. I'm the personal assistant for Sean Penn, calling from San Francisco. Sean's going to be in Baghdad next week. Can he give you a call? I said, sure, no problem. Give him my number. Hung up. week later, I get a phone call. Hey, Vivian, it's Sean. I'm like, Sean who? I had totally forgotten.
Yes.
It's Sean Penn. I'm like, oh, okay. Hi, where are you? Well, I mean, and he mentioned a town, very dangerous place. And he said, I hitchhiked from Jordan. And, you're the only person I know to call. So I said, okay.
Have you ever interviewed him before?
Never.
Okay.
I didn't know him at all.
Yeah.
I said, Sean, just stay exactly. Are you somewhere safe? This is in the middle of a very, very hot neighborhood where there are gunfights going on and bombs dropping. He said, yes, I'm fine. I said, okay, just stay right there. Don't move. I'm sending my driver to pick you up. Just don't go anywhere. I tell my driver, go pick up this man. He's American. He only speaks English. He's very important. Do not let him get into any trouble.
Don't lose him.
Yeah. It's like, sure, okay, I'm on it, gone. About an hour later, I get my phone rings, and now I'm starting to get worried. It's like, Vivian, it's Sean. I was like, Sean, where are you? He said, I've got a bit of a problem. I'm like, what happened? Well, I was filming these really cool things out of the window, and there were like some military checkpoints, and it just was like really cool for what I'm trying to do here. I said, okay, can you see any Americans anywhere? This was the American military had occupied Baghdad. And he said, no, I can't see any Americans. And I said, okay, look, let me get you somebody here to talk Arabic to whoever is. He said, now they've arrested me. I don't know what to do. I was like, okay, I'm going to get somebody who speaks here in our bureau who speaks Arabic to talk to whoever is, got you, is whoever is holding you. But please put down your camera like right away. And then there's like a long pause, and I hear like boots, clump, 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 and some American voices. It's like, what are you doing, sir? And the other guy says, holy shit, it's Sean Penn. I'm like, and Sean says, I think I'm okay now. It's like,
So, yes, he found someone to help.
So eventually he showed up at my hotel, and we went out to dinner, and then I took him around to meet some people, and, it was the middle of the night. But I had to take my hat off to him. I mean, there are not a whole lot of Hollywood stars who'd be
that would
crazy enough to do that.
Yes.
But I have had a lot of very strange experiences like that.
I read an interview that you did in 2016, and someone asked you, where were you eager, I think, to go? And you said, I would love to go to Damascus after the Assad regime falls.
That's so funny.
Isn't that okay? So December 8th, 2024, that happened, I believe, 9 years after that. What are your thoughts on that now? And can you believe that that has actually happened?
I guess, in some ways I just couldn't quite believe it. It happened so quickly. On the other hand, one thing about a dictatorship is they're not forever. They always collapse on their own weight. And we've seen it everywhere, from Latin America to the Middle East to Asia to everywhere. And so, yes, of course, eventually it was not going to sustain itself. And there are many reasons, of course, why it didn't, in terms of Iran and what's going on in Israel and Gaza and so on. Now, I got to say, I'm less interested in going, and maybe a little less keen to see what,
Mhm.
I mean, a little wary of what comes next. It could maybe not work out so well. I did cover all those revolutions, the Tunisian Revolution, the Libyan Revolution. I was in Tripoli a lot, and the Egyptian Revolution, all of which have been pretty troubled since then. So it's, the Tunisian Revolution, which began what we call the Arab Spring, which was 2011. I was writing for Time magazine. I kept calling my editor in New York and leaving messages for him saying, this looks like it's going to blow up. Maybe I should go to Tunisia. And he was very busy with, there was a couple of other big stories at the time. He kind of wasn't getting back to me. Eventually I called his secretary. I said, please just tell him I'm leaving on a 6 a.m. flight for Tunis. I'll call him on the other side. And he called me back. It's like, okay, fine, go. And, shut up already. It's like I get on the flight to Tunis at 6 a.m. from Paris. 8 a.m. it lands in Tunis. And I get off the plane and I just hear the sound all over the airport of these metal shutters coming down. Clank, 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 clank. And everything is locked down. And the president has fled the country. And the entire city is in total upheaval. So here's a dictator who's been in power for like 25 years. And it was the start of the Arab revolutions. It had never happened before. And it was really history making. So there again was like a land in the like wild and crazy time. Tunis is not a wild and crazy place. It's a lovely little city. But what a moment.
Yeah. Did you get out
And
of the airport?
got out of the airport. I remember actually leaning down. The only
get out,
thing that was still open in the airport was a little kiosk that sold SIM cards.
Yes.
And I grabbed one and I literally leaned down and like crawled under the metal gate that was about to close behind me and got in a taxi. And the taxi said, I can't get you near the city. You're going to have to walk the last couple of miles.
Oh my goodness.
I was like, okay. And by that stage, there was total curfew. And the military was on the street. And I got out of the taxi and I just remember, and I wrote about this in Time magazine, the sound of crunching over the broken glass, like every window was smashed. And I just like walked into this absolutely like insane situation, crunching over the glass on the streets. And it was really it was an amazing moment. And all of those moments were amazing. I was in Tripoli when they killed Gaddafi.
I read you were in a morgue.
Who was in power for 40-something years.
And you had interviewed him before as well, correct?
I had not interviewed Muammar Gaddafi. I'd interviewed Saif actually twice over, or maybe it was 3 times. I might be getting one time, but certainly twice. I interviewed him in the middle of the revolution, so before his father was killed, while he was still in Tripoli. And I interviewed him once before the revolution at his, mansion. And actually, there was a third time. I interviewed him the first time for Time magazine when Libya was thought to be this wonderful, great place that the Americans were pouring in, and they were opening an embassy, and Saif was the new face of, Arab. He was young. He was in his early 30s, I believe. And he had been educated in London, and he was kind of this, we later found out, this total playboy, but, he was sort of like, he seemed to be a totally different kind of guy. So I had seen him at various, he finally got to know me. By the time the revolution came around, he knew me. And so when I wanted to talk to him, I could talk to him. And he was thought to be the next president of Libya. Of course, that was not to happen. But Libya was a place I came to know quite well.
That is so fascinating. There's so much more we could talk about, and I know we only dedicated an hour. I could talk to you probably for years and days because you have so many interesting life experiences. It has been an honor getting to know you, and I can't wait to spend more time with you on a personal level. What's next? What are you working on now, and personally, professionally, and
Well, my life now has several different pieces to it. I still write for Time, but I also have a contract where I write for Fortune magazine. So I do a few big stories a year for them. Last year I was in Saudi Arabia, which actually I think was the third time I'd been there for Fortune and once for Time. I am on my way to Denmark in a couple of weeks for Fortune. I just did 2 stories this week on Greenland and Trump's machinations. Have another gig which has arisen over the past couple of years, which is I write a few times a month for the New York Times, a section that they have called Deal Book, which is kind of business and big power. So I've written about all sorts of things for them. I wrote 2 pieces this week on Greenland for them. So this is sort of like the world of journalism at the moment. It's very pieced together as the industry kind of figures out how to reconfigure itself at the moment.
is there anything you want our listeners to know about your life and the adventure you've lived, and something to inspire other women who want to live fearlessly and do amazing things?
I think that if I were to say anything, I don't have a daughter, but if I were to have a daughter, I would say to her, everything seems scarier in abstraction. The reality is like a lot less scary. The more you kind of take it on, the more capable you realize you are. And it's, I talk about the thrill, really, the thrill of arriving in a place you've never been in before, and having to figure it all out. But that can be sort of metaphoric as well. I think of the worst thing you can do as being just stuck in place. And so I guess that would be the one thing that I would say.
Thank you so much for your time today. And it's been my honor to be with you today, Vivian. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jane, for having me, and good luck with the podcast.
Thank you.